Welcome to Slash Forward. Where is the common ground between alien catmen, young lesbians enjoying each other's bodies, and gigantic switchblades as big as your arm? It's a confusing and nuanced situation, but we're here to educate ourselves. If you think you have it figured out, you're probably wrong, so we're going to begin by trying to piece things together right now. Let's get to it. We open on communication from an incoming spaceship, given the all-clear in total darkness so the filmmakers can save money on lighting, which they then immediately blow in the subsequent scene. Jessica is disturbed by this event and runs to tell her roommate Josephine. Jojo suspects the likely cause to be a local festival or a dream, but no matter what, she knows it's nothing at all to be bothered about. Jess affirms that she has been having a lot of nightmares ever since their friend Simon randomly and without warning stopped coming around. We are then gifted the delight of taking in a beast's eye view of the foliage, creeping around the house as a cat would, and discovering that the ladies were smart to lock up. But nearby, a young couple is getting hot and heavy in their car, and you've got to keep the windows down for that. Sandy's had enough awkward foreplay for one evening, so Anderson gets out to walk it off and let out some pent-up energy. He wings a heavy stick at some pervert in the nearby bushes, and despite the satisfying thud, he is dragged into the underbrush and mauled by some savage man-beast. Like most men-beasts, this one is your classic shapeshifter, so when Sandy takes off running, she very quickly circles around into Anderson's arms and, despite appearances, I believe she's actually dying here. The next morning, Jo and Jess are enjoying their sunrise snacks and radio programs. Jessica is vindicated when the talk of the town is the strange lights from the prior evening, but disappointed when she hears they are being attributed to your standard novel local atmospheric phenomena. Basically, the typical UFO brush-off. Jo takes her bowl of treats to the courtyard, where most mornings she enjoys getting energized for the day by caressing her young friend's face. Once she finishes up with that, they go out to see if they can find anything unusual related to the lights. Just a couple of gals with a palatial estate covered with beautiful landscaping and a smattering of eviscerated bunny carcasses. At rest time, Jo comments on how the jealous villagers remark on their relationship as friends, student teachers, confidants, and lovers. They wish they could. Jess walks off on her own, and Jo never misses a chance to take in that form. Nor does she ever leave her alone, popping out from all kinds of places all the time. Jessica brings up the topic of her taking a solo vacation just to get out there in the world and mix things up a bit. Jo, however, is unwilling to allow it and won't even entertain the discussion. Then they find Anderson limping around their garden shed. Jo tries to run him off, but Jessica has a tender soul, and his limp and confused look tugs at her heartstrings. So instead, they escort him back. She regales him with stories about all her old pets' names from when her father was alive, but he's having trouble sorting out broad categories. Specific individuals are a bit much for him right now. Once they've exhausted the names of pets and places they both know, she excuses herself to go see what's keeping Jo. Jessica apologizes for previously considering a temporary leave and lets Jo take point on sorting out the situation with this male stranger. They then bring tea to their visitor. As a student of life, he finds lessons all around him. With another hard one learned, they turn the topic to simpler things like his future plans, the purpose of decorative plants, and his first name.
Anders Anderson. Anders Anderson. Nice and poetic.
I guess. Jo leaves them so she can create some content for her cottagecore Instagram account. Jess does eventually leave to help Jo with the eggs, and they gossip about the insanity of a man who enjoys the company of parrots. Jess is getting some strong belongs in an institution vibes, but Jo won't let her call anyone, and now she doesn't think he's so weird. She wants him to stay for dinner and a sleepover. They interrupt his provocation of their pet with the offer of some fine victuals, which they never serve prior to 8 p.m. In the meantime, Jess makes herself comfortable by the shore while Anders does the same, listening to a radio about a missing car folks should be looking out for. This prompts him to return to the prior night's scene and show himself, even though he has no intention of sticking around. He gives the bobbies a good run until a quick switch turns the hunters into the hunted, and they are swiftly disposed of. Jess returns from tanning the front side of part of her torso to find Anders, who looks at her like she's about to make him act up. At dinner, it's revealed that they're vegetarians because they abhor the base animal functions of consuming flesh and breeding. So also,
Jessica and I are lovers.
Once that's settled, they do their best to pretend like they're enjoying the driest salads ever.
Are you all right?
but Anders can't do it. Jess goes to find him some clothes not covered in puke, but is only able to find clothes covered in blood. This is Simon's bloodied dress blouse next to the largest stiletto ever made. She's rattled by the discovery but forced to quickly get everything back in order upon Joe's approach. Now she's just gotta play it cool.
I was just looking for something for Anderson.
Mission accomplished. Later on, Jess starts waxing nostalgic about sexy old Simon and his dapper little cabbie's cap, just to see if she can get a rise out of Joe. But she remains unfazed. Jess tries to find a confidant in Anders, but he's no help. He knows nothing of sweaters or fears, and Joe is always lurking nearby. Jess decides to try for another bite at that apple, but makes no progress before hearing the creak of a floorboard. Once she gets everything tucked away, she confronts Joe, who is now suspicious that the dirty masculine energy in the house is throwing off the vibe a little. Jess rushes off to seek refuge in the awkward comfort of Anders' presence and then shows him his room. She departs with the wish that he experiences only the sweetest of dreams, and a warning to keep his room locked up tight. Then it's time to smooth things over with Mother by giving her a little show before bed and then sacrificing her body to assuage any lingering suspicions. Anders decides that the caged bird must spread its wings, so he wanders aimlessly through the labyrinthine attic and loft area. He eventually wanders into the bedroom right as Jessica is arriving at Pleasure Town, but do his feral eyes recognize the joy of a lover's touch? Since they're distracted, he ducks back out to his command post to report back on his experiences and alternate identity. The plan is to continue his surveillance. The next morning, still emanating that sex glow, Jess brings Anders some tea while outside. Joe learns that there was a fox in the hen house, throwing off the vibe. They run out at the sound of her screams and find her vowing to kill the fox what's been murdering the cuter animals living in their forest. But weren't you all about normalizing vegetarianism due to the sanctity of all life? Nah, it's the law of the jungle now, so they spread out to try to flush out their game. Anders is more of a stealth hunter. He doesn't really get it. And that's okay, because Jess is working overtime for a girl. Anders has a different kind of instinct that settles in, which Joe intends to blast out of him. And she misses, much to her consternation.
I missed! It's probably the next county by now.
Are we meant to believe she was aiming at the fox? And she really gets down on herself over it, expressing how she would do absolutely anything to catch the vile beast. After hearing this, Anders disappears. Then the girls share a tender embrace, and Jess feels a little poke coming through that she was hoping might be a pack of Rolos, but turns out to just be a giant knife. For her protection, of course. Out in the woods, Anders has another flash and dash, then comes in with a swagger and plops a big thank you down on the table for them. This is cause for celebration, so the girls make plans for a big, fancy dress and cake party. As they begin the preparations, Anders wanders off, but he returns with plenty of time for his glow-up. And honestly, your boys got me feeling some kind of way. As the festivities commence, we learn that champagne is a palatable fluid for young Anders, and he nurses that bottle while the ladies dance and Joe glares at him to assert possession rights over Jessica. As an empath, Jess feels the tension and goes to check the cake. She makes an offhand suggestion that they dance in her absence, and Joe takes that shit seriously. She's just about to dance up in his face when Jess returns to show off her skills in fondant sculpture. And quite frankly, that shit pisses Joe off, but not enough to break etiquette, and she graciously serves their guest first. While he's out erping up into the garbage, he finds the fox carcass he gave them as a gift, and it hurts a little bit. When he returns, they reveal that they've elected to play a game of hide and seek, and Joe will be the first seeker. Jess and Anders cuddle up in a closet, and he makes the observation that Jess is not unlike a caged animal, but they are quickly found, which leaves Anders to count while the others now hide. Jess discovers how difficult it is to find a proper hiding spot as an adult, and Joe tucks herself away with a little surprise for anyone who tries to make a loser out of her. Anders gets bored and just kinda gives up, taking a moment to let his natural instinct for nurturing take hold. But then the waft of a womanly musk sets his hunting instinct back into motion. We discover that his nose is better than his eyes, apparently, when he finds Jess. After a quick compliment on her scent, they go off to find Josephine together. Joe is a harder target, however, because she spread her urine all over the house to mask her trail. Jess still finds her due to a lack of understanding the rules, and she has a jolly good laugh about how Anders can sniff them out. She eventually notices the knife, and Joe reveals that, at some point, she found the fox outside and it was completely skinned. This leads her to believe that Anders is mad rather than fashionable. In the midst of this conversation, Anders gives them a creeper's salutation from the window, sending them running. But outside, the fox is now gone, which creates an aura of confusion over whom is actually the mad one. The mood has now been dampened, and Jo comes in hot with insinuations about Anders' hunger for raw flesh. But all this talk of predation is icky, and Jess retires for her evening bath. Once she's gone, Anders agrees to leave at first light. Jess jumps out with a surprise, revealing that there's no bath tonight because things are not always what they seem. That's an important lesson. To accentuate that, we hear Anders communicating that the plan is going well, but that he needs to find an alternate supply of something. The next morning, Jo stays downwind so she can follow Anders and observe him while he's on a hunt. But she can't find the right spot to make her move, so she leaves him to his privacy. When she returns to the house, they have an odd conversation about Simon, where it doesn't seem like Jess realizes he's been killed. But then an ear-piercing shriek sends them running. Poor Anders was swan hunting and fell through the smooth, shiny ground. It takes both ladies thrashing about and swallowing significant quantities of muddy water to eventually get him out, even though they're clearly touching the bottom. But hey, I guess he learned to never try that again. Jo is EMT certified, so she recognizes the best way to help him regain consciousness is to pretend like he already has. So they stand him up and drag him to the house. While it is mildly concerning that he is unfamiliar with the concept of water, they leave him to dry out in the sun so they can go clean up. After a pair of baths, the ladies have another argument about whether Jessica is allowed to leave.
This is my house! Remember!
And she finds her voice. They go shrieking into the courtyard where the disappearance of Wally escalates both octave and decibel. This knocks something loose in Jo's brain and she absolutely thrashes her lover, eventually locating the off switch before enlisting Anders to carry her upstairs. Jo reveals that she knows what it's like to flee a psychiatric ward, so she offers him some cash and tells him to head for the mountains. Determined to never be left again, Jo grabs a spade and dashes off into the woods. Before he leaves, Anders checks on Jess, who, now awake, begs for his help. She's back on that Simon's dead thing and shows him the knife as if they haven't both seen it multiple times. But Anders is distracted by the remembrance of what he witnessed take place on the bed. Leveraging this, Jess hopes a little tummy tickle will convince him to take her away. But as Jo digs Jessica's grave, events escalate in the bedroom that result in the animal being unleashed with very dire and unsexy results. Jo walks in on this and after a quick meow, just can't exit quickly enough. She conveniently runs back, trips, and falls into the shallow grave she dug, where we assume she remains for eternity. And that is symbolism. Sometime later, after licking himself clean, Anders heads back out to the shed where he unwraps his loose meat sandwich and calls out to the mothership. He is thrilled to report that humans are high in protein and easy prey, so he invites the whole gang to come on down. This movie was a statement. It was looking to get deep and really present us with an examination of some broad and psychological themes. As a result, the story was mostly window dressing. Also, due to the low budget, there were very few characters or locations. This keeps things fairly simple. Essentially, Anders was an alien. Was the Catman his true form? Who knows? But he came down in a flash with the mission of blending in and exploring the area to verify if it was suitable for their kind. It's obviously not revealed until the end, but they was looking for that choice source of protein. He found some rabbits, chickens, and a fox, but people are where it's at. For sure, people are great. He was only able to blend in with Jess and Jo because they did not immediately exhibit aggression toward him. Broski in the bushes over here tossed the stick at him, putting him into cat mode. Once there, if you run, you're just going to initiate his chase instinct. So that's on Sandy. He wanted to make sure the abandoned car wasn't causing any problems since he had to keep a low profile. However, when you run from the police, you initiate their natural chase instinct, a prescient message for today's audience. This resulted in all of their deaths. From here, he was able to keep things under control and essentially observe the interpersonal conflicts playing out in front of him. This involved Jessica and Josephine, young lovers who came together under unknown circumstances, and are enjoying their days spent living in this rural palace that was owned by Jessica and had been passed down to her as a family inheritance. Jo was incredibly jealous and protective of her, and tried to keep her confined to the estate. Jo seemed a bit off, and we do learn at the end that she had also apparently escaped from an institution at some point in the past. The pair had a mutual friend named Simon who was a dapper gentleman. At some point, he stopped coming around with no explanation, and it is insinuated very strongly that Jo killed him as a precautionary measure to keep Jessica from becoming curious about other people or places. It was a pretty toxic relationship, although sexually gratifying. Despite the simplicity, there are many questions that arise as as the drama unfolds. How did staying at the house help Anders in his mission? If he's a hunter and searching for protein, why wouldn't he be constantly moving? Maybe it was related to his leg injury, but he loses his limp pretty early on. And how was the end result of the story easier than anything else? He went through all that to acquire his human victims, and that was easier than the caged animals he could use for sustenance at any time? Or why not sample their meat up front? The characters also had a tendency to do something other than what was expected when transitioning scenes. For instance, Anders watches Jo running like he's on the hunt, but then ends up with Jessica. These strange misdirects happened multiple times and seemed like unintended consequences of not filming the correct sequences. Except for the bath fake-out, that was the only example that was part of the actual story. With that said, this cast and crew did pretty well with what they had, and honestly, this movie has some of the most fantastic water trauma acting ever committed to film. This scene goes on for days and is shot in slow-mo from a distance, but their body awareness and facial expressions are flawless. They never break character for even a frame, and they give it all to the camera. Anders is absolutely acting his nards off, and they're basically pretending like they're drowning in nature's equivalent of a kiddie pool. Exquisite. But who should watch this movie? Yeah, it's hard to say. It's sort of on the fence between being an okay movie and bad enough to be funny. There were some clearly insane elements here that could be fun to watch in a group setting, and it does attempt to dive into some treacherous and often overlooked themes, not unlike Sleepaway Camp. But the budget was too small. It doesn't give us enough happening throughout the film to keep it interesting, and likely mostly serves as a platform for enthusiasts to demonstrate their knowledge of obscure, wacky genre films. And now, you're one of those people, whether you intended to be or not. It's out of my hands now. Now that we're here, I wanted to congratulate you for making it to the end of the video, and affirm that you are a very special person because of it. And before we go, we'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors, memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks a growing collection of uncensored movie recaps. And if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to become part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.